My name is Ira Silverberg. I worked in publishing most of my adult life with a lot of kind of marginal communities and trying to help people who didn't have an opportunity to find their voice, find it and get out into the world. Met Nicole through a woman named Amy Hertz, who I met in a hospice in 1988 when she was the death doula to one of my mentors. And we didn't know either or the other, worked in publishing, which she was kind of an associate editor at Henry Holt. I was running publicity at Grove at a very young age. And we've stayed in each other's lives for 35 years, maybe.
Right.
And about a year ago, about this time last year, she called and said, I have a client I want you to meet, but you have to read this Bloomberg piece first. And I read this piece and I was like, what's the big deal? It's a classic takedown. It's like it's a vagina-phobic FBI going after someone doing good work. What's the problem? She said, well, they've been out of business for 5 years. And she's brilliant.
You're the architect of a lot of thinking that exists in our culture to this day.
I thank you, but I take no credit for anything.
And I know a few people in high places. I know a lot of people in low places, but the few people in high places that I know consider you a hero.
Well, thank you.
And who have said
an honor to work with a lot of the people I work with.
That their publishing career, their career as writers and reporters exists because of the work that you've done for free speech.
I'm Naomi Aeon, and I am a former academic who, like Nicole, studied intensely cultural theory, feminist theory. I got a PhD in a field called History of Consciousness, and with a women's studies annotation, and then I went off straight out of grad school to teach at Harvard for 2 years, where I taught women's studies and Black studies. Yale hired me from there for 10 years, where I taught Black studies and American studies. And during my time at Harvard, I had a spiritual awakening and suddenly knew that I didn't know what I didn't know. None of it made sense to me. So I spent the next decade working at Yale and doing intuitive readings for people on the side. By the end of my time at Yale, I had a client base of hundreds of people that then turned into eventually thousands. The solution to every problem was, in my world, similar to how for Nicole it's eros, for me it's this, we, they, it's this me, you interface, and the coming home to the self.
The two of you have these great core values. There are women who follow you, there are women who believe in what you're saying. There must be other women out there who similarly are leading other women to a healthier, better existence. How does one make that kind of happen and congeal it in a way that's organic and reaches across all boundaries? Because we're looking at a lot of boundaries that people set for themselves and others so to keep people away. But you're boundary breakers.
I built One Taste with the vision of creating a system that would foster people bringing their unique expression, their unique facet of the diamond out.
Yeah.
Women are terrified of it. We're terrified of our own power. We're terrified of turning on. As soon as you turn on, you're so vulnerable as a woman. And then to unite with other women and all of the shadow that you talk about, the underlying stuff, the jealousy, because this mind is hooked on getting proximal power, not on personal power. And so all of these factors are at play. I spent 20 years, and I'm on this, saying to these women, really powerhouse women, it's not going to happen alone. It's not going to happen. We have to unite. We have to unite. And there would be these fiefdoms on the one hand, where women were just so happy to have what they had, they didn't want to risk it. And then the second portion is this massive resilience that a woman needs in order to be in front. And for whatever reason, I've had the constitution that can withstand the blows and still find joy. But I talk about secondary benefits because there's a secondary benefit to being a second-class citizen. And that is there are certain blows that you don't take because you're not out in front. If you're invisible, there's a secondary benefit.
Absolutely.
And so there's a bulking.
Build your strengths from
Yeah,
behind.
true.
That's it.
And that's not a small power. The power of victimhood. The power of victimhood is quite powerful, not to our advantage, but well, to our survival advantage, perhaps.
That's it.
But
That's the problem with the sensitivity
issue. It's amazing. I mean, it's victim no more once you've gone through a cycle of claiming who you are, and that seems to be the thing. That's the wall.
Yes.
Well, this is historical feminism. I mean,
Here we
the
go.
meeting of these two minds in Bali is historical feminism. This is
that's
like,
so good.
you know,
That's
that's what kicks it off for me.
It felt like a seismic shift.
It did.
It felt like the
did.
meeting of two continents, tectonic plates colliding.
It did. What happened is so rare in my experience of feminism, in that both of us really had ridiculously strong poles, but we had a greater desire for dialogue and the truth in such a way that we managed to bring it together, because those can be so explosive. You have to be willing to keep wrestling and be willing to be wrong. Yeah. And then in terms of being willing to be wrong, it has to be almost a thrill to be wrong, because you got to a deeper truth, and to have an ally who will celebrate when they're wrong, or when they're wrong, and then, but also celebrate like just the emergence of the truth. I think that's one of the pieces that we're missing in feminism, is we're missing the connection. It's just this hard, dry, political combat, as opposed to what it's aimed to do, and that's to create to my mind, the emergence of the feminine into the sphere of feminism. And a fundamental part of that is connection.
There was a lot of Marxist theory that was underlying feminism, and it never quite gelled.
That's brilliant.
You know, it just really, it didn't, because it shouldn't be Marxist
in
a certain way. It has to be like post everything.
Right.
At times.
Yeah. So then that's kind of the point I'm making. Like, the antidote to that is not the opposite. The antidote is to add the collective, right? The bigger picture, the larger perspective, that of course it's ridiculous
and is it
to be traumatized.
Put us in that place? Is that kind of an elitist culture that needs to be overthrown?
I have my own ideas about that, which is like, that's what we say it is. We say it's privilege, but it's kind of universal.
Is it?
We're all doing a version of that. We're all disconnected from ourselves. We're all fractured. Our groups are, and our individuality is. We're cut off from ourselves. So we're all doing that in a way. We just believe that our way of doing it is the legitimate way. It doesn't mean there's not legitimate disadvantage, and that some people are more fortunate or advantaged than others. But we're all also human, and human folly is a big factor across the board. We're folly-ridden, and we're trying to derive significance. All of us are. And a lot of times we're doing it in unhealthy and even toxic ways. And I think that's a shared condition across our groups, but that's not to take away from the very real challenges, struggles, and the very real traumas. Like, there is something helpful about recognizing that we're kind of all traumatized, even the privileged people. We're all confined in these cages. We're all in captivity in a way. Like, all of our freedom is limited in a way that we don't realize.
I mean, because the whole trauma thing at times feels completely overwhelming. Like, wait, that's not trauma. That's really...
Well, I think what we've done is...
It's like we created this space for people to go into, and they don't get out.
Well, I think we've reified the notion of trauma and turned a potential into a diagnosis. So if you actually look at what trauma is it's an impact bigger than the person can digest or keep in circulation. So it turns into a kind of congestion, and then that congestion gets in the nervous system gets locked, and then the thinking as a result gets discursive, right? So we have it that it's this life sentence, as opposed to, oh, it's a potential. You now have added energy that's locked in your system. It's all theoretical about how you work with things. There isn't an efficacy, and so then there's a greater chasing for an end result that prevents us from actually getting to the potential. You know,
and this is the elitism I'm referring to. It's like diagnosis happens at a level that has nothing to do with the people
Right.
who are being diagnosed.
So if you come back to feminism, and I think this happens across the board, but where I think everything went off the rails, if you look at the Feminine Mystique, which I think it's a brilliant book and entirely misguided. And what happened was she has the most sublime diagnosis. If you read the book, you know, the problem we cannot name, the description of the ennui, the endless searching to fix something that feels like it can't be fixed, and you feel like there shouldn't be a problem. It's just genius. The problem is the prescription that she gave, and the prescription that she gave was to be appropriated into masculine culture. And that will never work. In fact, it needs to go in the opposite direction. The problem for women isn't that we aren't good enough men. That we aren't CEOs, that we aren't in government. The problem is that we don't know who we are in order to be good enough who and what we are. So then you talk about separation, which I think is the profound introduction to the conversation as the malady. And then you look at why that is, and it's an absence of the feminine. That's what we bring. We bring that, you know, life comes through our bodies. We're biologically, and then we can get into a trans conversation, because I think that's really interesting. But we are biologically blueprinted, programmed for connection. So if you have this vessel not clear on who it is and what it's here to do with its own metrics, then what you end up with is an over-masculinated culture. And then the only idea of power that women have is to beat men or knock them down, but it's not to operate in concert in such a way that we move forward.
Yeah, to operate in concert in our, as us, and as us indeed, right? To connect.
Right.
With the other, shall we call it the other, which isn't really other because it is of oneness,
right?
But to be ourselves, to be in coherence within ourselves.
We don't have it really come down to the personal in terms of knowing who the personal is to be political. And so if I practice my political activism as in a masculine form, in the form of combat and conquering, everyone loses. And that's I think that's an important distinction. It's not just that women are losing to men. It's that
the feminine space became a masculine space.
That's
precisely.
Right.
It just kind of morphed into it.
Yes, and thereby the biggest problem, it reifies the very thing it's critiquing.
Yes.
Right. We start with Friedan and the Feminine Mystique, bra burning.
Right.
Was supposed to be the antidote, no? Like, okay, we're women now.
Right.
Like here are our tits. We're gonna own them.
See, I love bra burning. I love that.
So that's what I like.
I love the guerrilla aspect of it. I think we've stopped being guerrilla, but
did it help?
I think it did at the time. Did we continue from there? No. I think what happened was, and I think this happens in pain. You look for a quick solution. It's, you know, you're feeling bloated, and so you do the fad diet that doesn't work and perpetually disappoints, and then that disappointment becomes embedded in the system. And then because if you feel feminism today, it's just pretty disappointed and resentful.
I don't even know that it exists anymore.
It's very reactive and prescriptive.
Right. But that and that I would say is
divisive.
If you have
it's in conflict with itself.
With itself.
It doesn't know what it is, and you have these generational issues that are bizarre at best. And an entire generation caving to a very sensitive generation who actually aren't so sensitive because they're beating everybody.
But they are sensitive. They're fragile because they're lacking a fundamental nutrient. And that again and again, I always say the fundamental nutrient is eros, but eros fundamentally is that which connects what's separate.
Yeah.
Women learning their unique value, their eudaimonic value, the blueprint that's in each of us. So each individual learning their own value, then learning gender, religion, ethnicity, value. And then evolving that into its highest form so that you have something to contribute, because that's what we want as human beings.
Our truth isn't a narcissistic version of truth. It's an authenticity that's deeper, truer, realer, and enables us to be more
generous.
Be more generous. It's a better self. I know that sounds pedantic, but a better self that is more, yes, generous of spirit, magnanimous, because we can be, because that when we're filled with ourselves in the more evolved sense or the higher sense, we are so much more. We're magnetic. We're we're directed.
These truths are self-evident. They're like gravity. What? Women have inestimable power. And Amy said, I started the book with that. And she said, you already lost your reader. And that was incomprehensible to me, that it's so obvious.
And do you think it's the whole victim culture thing that makes that just impossible? Or is it more? Because it's, I mean, I understand why people would say that, because they have to own, no, I don't have power, I'm a victim.
There's very real sensitivity that's from being weather beaten, right? Not being who you really are creates a real vulnerability.
Misdiagnosis, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because I think there's a very real pain, and that's, people hear my saying, you have inestimable power, as saying, you don't have very real pain. No,
that's not the implication, exactly.
Right. I know that pain. It's not, I'm out there being dismissed by scientists, again and again. I'm in the position I'm in. I understand that pain. What I'm saying is that pain will never be resolved with the solutions that are being offered. The solution of hyper focus on subjugation will never liberate you. It just won't.
It's a wheel.
Precisely.
Right. And so then when you say the nature of the problem, is it victim culture? Victim culture is a result of this misdiagnosis.
It's like the refinement of it just gets sharper and sharper.
It gets sharper and sharper. And it's like a wildfire. It just wants to keep feeding, because there is no actual, it's an empty calorie. Journey from women who are so, in terms of, evolutionary biology, geared to be dependent for survival and look outside of themselves for solutions. The journey to then turn that back in, that's 10,000 miles. Because the people who are creating the metrics, which are the masculine systems, including feminism and academia, are using masculine metrics to tell women how to develop, and they don't work. That's what when I say, is it true? Is it timeless? Is it true for women? Is that true for me? No, it's not. When the spotlight comes to actually know who I am and to own that power, that is akin to death. To watch these women look at me like, you can do that. And then to progressively watch this connection and this web being woven with women, hugging and connecting, and a different, inserting this different energy, then what you see is, all of a sudden you see the value of that. Because we don't recognize the value of that. And you see these women sitting more upright because they understand what they bring. And it's not that they bring it because they're too weak to be combative. They bring it because this is what subdues combat.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I prefer to look at it like there's inertia and ignorance. And ignorance in the true sense of the word ignorance meaning genuinely not knowing. Not being like, you're ignorant. A genuine not knowing.
Yeah, not knowing what you don't even know.
Right.
Yeah.
So the inertia that we face as female front people, and it's funny, I was thinking I don't like the word teacher, I don't like the word leader, I don't like those words, they don't fit this. I was thinking ally, as female allies.
Lovely.
Because I think as women, we are not on high. That is not where our power comes from. Our power comes from the trenches. I haven't left the trenches in 20 years. And I don't plan, I would like to, trust me, but I don't think that's going to happen in this lifetime. Feminism has become just a discourse in why I can't. And so to begin to actually do the work to undo the machinery that says we can't, the mindset that says that we can't, that's really, really challenging work. And it's an invisible wall, inertia, that women face that I don't think most women even realize exists.
How do you get into that system and change them? How do you, and we, whatever the system is, whether it's judicial, whether it's religious, how does a woman who owns her power?
A woman's power, and I'm going to use the more colloquial term, but it's the power of seduction. It's the power of magnetization. It's the power of drawing in, because our power is so invisible. You can't command. Right. You can't say you're missing this.
It's a quiet power.
It's a soft power.
And that's what women are afraid of, because that's the vulnerability is in the softness.
That's it. But the power is in the softness too, and
right,
that's
which is misunderstood.
Right, it's what I said in Erotic Justice, where we've given up on the power of love. We view it as impotent because we've deactivated it. It is. I have never commanded a woman into her power. I've never told her what to do, and so obviously I'm seen as suspect because seduction is suspect. But I always, or as often as possible, I play the bottom role. I'm happy, in a world that wants to be tops, I'm happy being the bottom.
But it's a power bottom role.
Right. That's it. Right.
Yes.
And I'm happy to, when a woman expresses genius, to say that's a genius, because then I'm around women who feel confident and who can recognize it. We don't have reflections.
I think men, the masculine, are starting to, again, in the either or paradigm, disown their masculinity and tame themselves to be more, like in the wake of this feminist movement, these feminist commands for them to be less hard, less
I love hard.
insensitive.
I love insensitive. I would prefer that.
I'm like, but I know we love men.
Right.
We love men. We
Right.
love men just as they are.
Right.
As a category, but there is, I think, I think there's some kind of a shift happening, or some apology.
Do men know who they are?
Why would
I
don't?
don't. I just
men?
think there is an apology, like sort of in the soul of men. There's a taming, I think, happening as women are becoming more and more officially masculine in the ways you described, like feigning masculinity, performing masculinity.
Right. And that's
men are performing
feminine.
A more, I don't know if it's femininity, but it's a tameness or a harmlessness or a calmness. Like there's a lot of conversation about that.
So deeply masculine to my mind.
Well, I mean a sedatedness, like let me say it more crassly, a kind of an impotence.
Yeah.
Like, I can't not see that. Nobody does. Right. That I personally think that the distortion's on both sides.
It's very polar.
Right.
I mean, what you're describing, which is fascinating.
Right. I think men and women alike do not have a role model for what true feminine,
what healthy version.
And so what you end up with is, I'm going to say something again controversial, but like, just to be funny, like the drag queen version of the feminine. It's like the hyper active, exaggerated vulnerability, the emo, and that's not feminine.
Mm-hmm. No, it's just
a
mask.
This is how a feminist conversation happens, with these voices here that are willing to meet in the middle and say things that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's the problem, is no one is willing to say anything uncomfortable,
right?
And
and it's so many monologues. Yeah.
It's time to shake things up a little bit. And I do think there's hope for that. Mm-hmm. But everyone's being very quiet about it because they don't want to hurt the kids.
Well, this is one of the places where we need a rebranding on pain, in that, I think we've lost the idea that the obstacle is the path, and
Yes,
that an
I
intimate
agree with
relationship with pain, because look, I have done the deep dive, you've done
Yes,
the deep dive,
you
you've done the
have.
deep dive
Yeah.
in many traditions, many arenas, and here's what you discover, I think, at the end of, of all,
a certain number of years.
as far as I've made it down the road, this is what I've discovered. Maybe you discover something different at the end of infinity, but what I've discovered is it's a path of disillusionment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Right?
Did you have to put it? Couldn't you just say truth? Like, it is. It's so disillusioning.
And
It
that
is,
moment
yes.
of having been
It
so,
is.
you
It
knew
can.
everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh my God, those moments where you're just like, where you're on your knees, I don't know anything.
Yes.
And the pain of that. And then being able to
Oh.
be with that and
Yeah.
stay there.
The death,
again
the
and
death.
again, Suzuki Roshi had it right with, be the beginner, don't be the expert.
Yes.
And we've lost that because we aren't resilient enough. And I'm going to say we aren't resilient enough because we don't have eros, but we aren't resilient enough to have an intimate relationship with our pain in order to experience that pain as growth.
Yes.
In the brain, I don't know if you guys have seen this research, but the pain of growth is registered as the same as the pain of death. So as you're growing, you better expect a lot of pain. And we have this quick fix culture that says you can do this without pain.
Yeah. You can hack this.
Right. And I think what we ought to, or no pain, no gain. So we overcorrected over here with the opposite.
Yeah.
And there's actually, I don't know what we would call it, right pain. There's right speech, right pain. To be in that perpetual state of discomfort,
live with what
of
you
growth.
can, yes, until you can't, and then figure it out.
Yeah,
but don't kill it
absolutely.
before it even starts.
That's it. That's it exactly.
And,
Yeah. I want to talk about the trans community. I think it's a really important inquiry at this time.
Oh, yeah.
As we talk about women, and I think I have a feeling we'll all have similar views. I'm not sure, but it's a spectrum. And how do we address that in a way that
honoring of everybody.
That's it.
Honoring of everybody.
Uniquely.
Thank you.
Uniquely, exactly.
Thank you. And even within that community, uniqueness is not always honored because there's definitely a youthful doctrinaire like contingent. And it's just, I mean, I was working with a woman who's a poet. It was another mind meld, and she contracted with me to work on this manuscript with her. Meeting number 2, she identified as trans, which I didn't understand, because she's a cisgendered female.
Right.
So I could not, and at some point I didn't call her they, I called her she, and I got a phone call. I mean, maybe she was anxious about the money, but she's like, I don't think we can work together because you called me she, not they. And I just said, look, I gotta tell you something. I'm older, I'm twice your age.
Right.
And I have not adjusted to this. And I see a woman who is a cisgendered woman, and I think she. You want me to call you they? I'll call you they. But I'd rather just call you by your name.
Right.
And that was all she needed to hear, was that
right.
Because it got around all of the identity stuff. It's like that.
So when we talk next time, because I identified as queer for many years. I just don't even know what I would call me now, but and
Nicole.
Right. But we talked about this yesterday. My coming out was with a female to male. It wasn't called trans so much then. It was FTM and MTF.
Right.
And at that time, it was so sexy, and so
it was erotic.
It was erotic, and the difference is what made it erotic. And I just have this concern, very deep personal concern for my own eros, that what you were just saying about the gay community assimilating. I hope for the trans community that exquisite uniqueness remains, because it's a power.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
Yeah,
let's-
no,
well, I
they're,
wanna-
they're dealing with it.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about it
Yeah,
because
yeah.
this is so charged, and J.K. Rowling, and you know
Yeah.
people, Jordan Peterson, not like
Yeah.
Liz. So I'd love to
lot-
get into
a
that
lot there.
conversation
Mhm.
and really what it means for women.
Yeah.
Because I think it's an important
Because it
conversation,
does have
and I think it's an
implications for
important
women.
Yeah.
friendship
Yeah,
that
yeah,
needs
yeah,
to
yeah.
happen.
Mhm.
And I think both groups, although in some people's minds it's one group, but have a certain kind of pain that's reacting,
Mhm.
as opposed to the potential that could.
She didn't have a period. And that,
Right.
and I mean, I was at a dinner party and this
Right.
woman is yelling.
Right. But I
Yeah.
have had a period, and they're
You know,
really
it was
painful,
like-
and
it's like-
I want that
I'm like,
acknowledged.
she's a trans woman.
So,
You're a
right.
woman, okay? She's a trans woman. Like she's not. We know she's not like you.
But both matter.
Yeah.
How do you
Right.
have
The
both
differences.
matter?
Yeah, we have
That's
to
why we have
learn
the
to
word
honor
And
different.
acknowledge. So, well, anyway,
To
I think
me,
it's an
like-
important
Yeah, no, it's
conversation.
fascinating.
No
Fascinating.
conclusion, important conversation potentially. What do
Because
you
the
think?
subjection of women has been ignored. So
Right.
it's not like an even playing field
Right.
to begin
that,
with.
that
It's
women
like,
walk around.
it's assumed that we're so empowered compared to trans women,
Right.
trans men.
and that
Like,
homeless
we're-
women are walking around without sanitary products.
Yeah.
You know that's real.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very real.
And if you imagine what that would be like,
Mhm.
bleeding for 7 days with no sanitary products in public,
Mhm.
the depth of
Right.
humiliation of that's a real thing. So
Yeah.
how do you both acknowledge that pain but not have it be something that's
The women's
weaponized?